Cool. Well,
Yeah.
well, I promised my Patreon supporters a hard-hitting, pull no punches interview.
Oh,
Um,
good.
so I think that's what they're expecting here. Um, I wanted to talk about our experiences teaching languages online, right,
Hmm.
which we've both done now in different ways. I thought that would be a pretty good sort of core subject to focus on, and of course, we can wander into other things
Mm.
as they come up. I have maybe an hour and a half. I don't know how much time you have, but
Sounds perfect to me.
okay.
Yeah.
We'll start with I don't think that you need a whole lot of introduction. I think anybody who knows who I am knows who you are. Uh, so let's welcome again Luke Grenier, the
Thank you to have me, sir.
the 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 nicest guy in old language YouTube. And actually that's something I've always wondered about. It's like how do you stay how do you maintain this like cheerful mien, throughout all these different things? Like you never seem worn down. Like it's just
Oh, well, the wearing down happens. I sure as it does to anyone, but I don't know, diet and exercise, but but other than that, no, I mean, I'm happy to the stuff I get to talk about, that's for sure. That's encouraging for me. Also have the advantage of vehemently doing what the algorithm tells you not to do, which is I don't specialize very much. Obviously, I tell you a lot
yeah,
of ancient language stuff, but it's all over the place. Even a mild dabbling in ancient Egyptian or something like that, or Old English, which is not what I normally do. I permit myself to do so since I have a channel that's called Polymathy and talking about or spacecraft or Star Trek or geology or whatever I want. Then I can't. So I get those breaks, and then the algorithm smacks me and says, this is not what your channel's normally about, but I don't care. I
right.
want to talk about this because it makes me happy. So that's um variety is the spice of a YouTuber.
Content. I think it's the best thing about your channel is that you never know what you're gonna get next.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm
You know,
glad.
some of your sidetracks into geology or like you said, ancient Egyptian or just like I mean it's just fun, like not really knowing, you don't have a formula. Uh,
No, I have some ways of doing things. If
oh sure.
Yeah, if Danny will film me when which is fantastic, like in the geology videos, man, the really good ones are gonna come out soon too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like Canyonlands. Oh, I can't wait to do that one.
Oh
That's
sweet.
Yeah, I have a nice dramatic opening for that one.
Nice,
On the edge
nice.
of a cliff of a canyon. On a canyon on top of a canyon. That's one of my favorite places.
Were you at Dead
And
Horse Point or
yep,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
When you said that, I wondered if that was where you were. Okay.
Yeah, this is a good place in the islands in the sky. But yeah, or of course recording right in front of the camera and it's interesting. You never know what's going to be popular or not. Um so yeah.
No, and you have resolutely refused to do shorts. Uh,
Well, until recently,
oh, did you start recently?
only because so I started yeah, I did a couple on both the channels, both Polymathy and Scorpio Martianus. So on Scorpio Martianus, I had just finished doing a class at Ancient Language Institute with this fantastic colleague of ours at Ancient Language Institute. His name is Michael Kopf, and he goes by Kopf, of course, is Kepale in ancient Greek, like cephalopod, a head foot. And he calls himself Kepalos, which is actually an ancient Greek name, and as well. So because his last name is Kop. So Kepalos is this wonderful, wonderful teacher of ancient Greek. He speaks very fluently and is incredibly erudite on such a wide variety of subjects in the ancient Greek language. And what we were talking about, is doing some study of Homer, of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And he was telling, because I asked him, like, so, because the class is going to end, and we were just really just scratching the surface. And I had not really bothered with Homer, because Homeric Greek is so different from classical Greek or Koine Greek that I just like, okay, this is alien, and I'll get around to that when I do, because I want to make my classical Greek much more competent anyway. So But then there was the excuse. We're in a class where it was a spoken ancient Greek environment, and he was teaching Homer, talking about it, and of course the standard ancient Greek, which would be like Attic or Koine. Those are mostly interchangeable. And and then but so we're talking about it, and I was just so amazed by th what about the epics themselves, about the Iliad and the Odyssey, and I was so inspired to then actually to try to learn more. But I was like, well, this class is ending, and I asked him, "Kepale," which is vocative for Kepalos. Kepale, what is how do I now continue to study this? How do I acquire this knowledge like you have? I don't know, like, because all the books are terrible. What do
Hmm.
you do? And he said what he ha happened to do some years ago, he had an appointment every week or something. And instead of taking the bus, he ended up just by chance opening up his phone to just because he was like curious about like, well, let me read the Iliad. I'm just start at the beginning. And he loves poetry and the meter and all that, so he decided to just start to recite it aloud and started memorizing it. So for the over the course of 10 months, he ended up memorizing the first 100 lines. We're just marching through the Austrian rain and with buses driving by in the Sabak, and he was just going, "Man and I de te apelea dio aquileo solo mene," and just going on and on like that, and having a great time of it and just enjoying it. And it's like, wow, that sounds great. That's something that I would definitely do, and I found it very inspiring. So I made a video on Scorpio Martianus about a month ago saying that I'm going. This is the Kephalos method to Homer because this is what he's told us, which is you memorize any amount of the text that you want. And you could really apply this to any piece of literature, especially poetry, whether Greek or Norse or English. Memorize it, and then once and be able to recite it because something that with the Homeric Greek, which you might know, is so different, especially because it started as oral poetry back in the Bronze Age and then through the Greek Dark Ages and was finally written down with Homer, and then it became fixed. But before that was added to by who knows how many people, who knows how many different dialects, and it's just this because stuff in it doesn't make sense if you treat it as one single dialect, which it's not. And if you focus on you can study, really parse, analyze every single etymology and every little bit. All that's fascinating, but that's an infinite work. You could take the first 10 lines and spend a month pulling apart everything, probably. But instead of going that analytical route, he said basically to do what the ancient people did, which was they memorized it at a young age, many long passages from the Iliad and the Odyssey in ancient classical Greek times through through Roman times. And they did it because that was the education. Homer was the teacher of all the Greeks and then all the Romans too. And it's what they learned. They learned not they learned about different the Greeks' sense of morality and bravery and courage and tragedy and all these different things, heroism and defeat and and victory. All these different things were those values were in there that were common to the Greeks and were thus seen as a very good teacher. And so they memorized it, which is very interesting. But more to the point for a modern person like for me, was that if you then memorize it, you start to feel intuitively and understand and appreciate the poetry far better. Even if you get to a word that you don't know, because it's a hapax legomenon, a once said word which has no, it doesn't occur anywhere else, or it's a strange form, or you don't recognize it because it's archaic. Well, then, if you have that, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about not knowing the word. If you just try to memorize it, you might actually find reciting it several times aloud as you're trying to memorize it. Oh, that's ole conto must be from the verb opolumi, which means to destroy. And then so you don't realize, oh yeah, apo is just a prefix on the olumi, and that's what ole conto means, that the people were destroyed. Ole conto de laui. And you realize that, and then what's even more valuable, though, is so many ancient Greek authors like Plato constantly quote Homer.
Hmm.
So just to be if we want to approach want to read the stuff, yeah, we can just skip to the philosophy, and English translation is fine for that if you want to read the Republic. But being able to then already know the lines or have seen them, or at least be used to the meter, have some sense of what Homer is like, and realize his importance to the ancient Greeks. just by having memorized, I've memorized to at line 30, 32, 33. What day is this? I think it's 33. Um, and so I decided I'm just going to do this. I'm going to make it a challenge. I'm going to challenge myself to memorize 100 lines of Homer in 100 days. And that's been going very well. And I'm going to then actually do this. I hope it goes well. I'm going to prove by closing my eyes and reciting the first 100 lines of the Iliad. I have it recorded, and that'll be a video on Polymathy where I talk about all this. But the first video is saying I'm going to do this challenge, and here's the Kefalos method, and the Polymathy video will reiterate that in English and see if I can do it. So, in order to kind of inspire other people to try it if they want, I've been making reels on Instagram and then reposting them as shorts on Scorpio Martiano. So this is the answer to your question, but you don't do shorts, and I did resist as long as I could, but then I found a good reason,
Yeah.
which was to
Well,
recite one line of Iliad at a time.
it hadn't even occurred to me that what because I see that like every day you post something with the Keflos challenge, either you or someone else on
Right.
Instagram. It hadn't even occurred to me that you were posting those on YouTube as shorts. I consume no shorts, so
You still haven't consumed any shorts?
oh no.
I resisted so long, so
No,
long.
I was making them every day for a while. I mean, like I don't think they really get any more views than the long form stuff though.
Oh, putting a short every day on Sculptor Martianos has not helped the channel at all.
Yeah, same.
It's been not useful. It's supposed to bring in new subscribers or something, but I also am not putting new content on since I put on up the Kefalos method video. So I don't know what if I were
Well,
being in more properly active, I don't know.
yeah, I mean, I tried for a while. I was trying like all kinds of original content in shorts. Like each day I would do like the meaning of a different Norse name, or I would do the origin of a different word, with some fun
Mm,
story behind it or something like that. And man, I mean, it does not impact anything. Um, so like I'm still doing it some, but I'm not, at least not right now. I'm not pushing myself to. But
yeah, it's a
but
lot
on
of
the
effort.
subject, but on the subject of what you're actually making the shorts about, I have told people before that memorizing poetry is a great way to learn. Um, I don't, I mean, maybe I should phrase it as a challenge like you do. I don't know. Like memorize 100 lines of Hobble. Would that be,
The Keflos challenge to the Havamal.
yeah.
Do it.
Well, like I don't know if I would necessarily want people to learn like the 100 first lines. That wouldn't be quite as meaning.
Well, well, you select them. You select the lines and post it somewhere where people can
Or
then follow you on the challenge.
just say like any 100 lines or something. I mean, I might even have 100 lines from it. Well, because like how many stanzas is that? Each stanza is six. That's going to be like a dozen stanzas, so that's not bad. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I,
huh.
yeah. You should.
Yeah. Although I think I would have a harder time getting people to take the challenge. I feel like it would become one of the things that you run into with Norse studies that I feel like you run into a little bit less with classical studies is you run into the notion that like this needs to be a sort of devotional exercise. And it's like, I don't know.
Devotional.
Like I just think,
Devotional exercise. I don't follow.
well, people want to make it a religious thing.
You did mean religious. Okay, I do
Yeah,
follow
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Religious
Which,
follow that.
to me it isn't. But like I probably have about that much of Hofmann memorized. I don't know. I guess I could set it up as a not rival Kefalo's challenge, but like a similar thing.
Well, I'm going to keep doing it. I encourage other people to come up with their own. I'm going to do the Aeneid,
Oh,
first 100 lines, and I'll eventually do Beowulf. I'm going to keep calling it the Kephalos challenge just because it's a hashtag that's now been used
okay,
at
yeah,
least a
sure.
hundred times. So that helps.
Yeah, it could be an Old
Um,
Norse Kefalo's challenge. I don't know. I wonder
yeah,
if people would do it. Uh, it's but it is something that I've encouraged people to do because you're exactly right. When you've read and recited a lot of poetry, you do start to get a feel for it, and I think you get a better feel for the language as a whole because you anytime you're reading anything new, you sort of flash back to what you have memorized, right? It's like, where have I seen this
absolutely.
before? Oh yeah, it is in that line that I remember from there. Or
That's
what
right.
or this construction is so weird. But it is kind of like this line that I saw before, and that meant that
Oh yeah,
it gives you a storehouse that I think that people often lack. I think some of the greatest philologists of all time have been people who had massive storehouses of memorized data, like uh, in Old Norse studies and certainly teaching my Old Norse class. Um, there's plenty of griping about Guthbrandur Vigfusson, who made the most complete dictionary that's in existence, but he did know his corpus. Got to give him that. Um, and of course, the only way you get to do that is by reading a lot and probably very consciously memorizing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about our respective experiences teaching classes a little bit. And I especially want to hear about yours because
Yeah.
you've been doing it for a while now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
So,
just got done doing a seminar of Latin poetry, actually, which was wonderful. Had great
hmm,
attendees. I did two in English and one in Latin.
hmm.
It was through the Ancient Language Institute. That was a lot of fun.
Were those multiple installments or were they?
It was the no, it was just it was the same. If you have some experience in Latin, now learn why Latin poetry is so great. Why you should learn how to recite it, so you can feel the meter
Hmm,
easily, naturally, intuitively. How you can continue to exercise that skill in the future, and yeah, and I have videos on polymathy from years ago where I basically teach the same stuff, but it was nice because I had the people there. So even if it was their first time doing this or not, they were able to, I was able to coach them so
hmm.
that they could practice, make mistakes. I could say, okay, that was good, but here's this little thing, and and it really ended up being well received. So I'm glad. And I also love talking about that. So yeah,
It's great having an audience actually there, isn't it? I mean, I think
yeah,
that's probably the best thing about teaching vis-a-vis YouTube is that there are people, I mean, you're not seeing them the same way. Well, it depends on how you set up your Zoom, but it's not the same as being in a classroom with someone, but it is very nice to actually be able to check, like, all right, are you following me?
yeah.
What's interesting you about this? What's not clear to you about that? It's nice to have that real-time kind of feedback.
Yeah. Well, I like the mix because as YouTubers, we create lessons or educational material that will last as long as the internet. Hopefully
That's
that'll
optimistic.
well, as long as YouTube. I'm sure everything will be saved somewhere in some future archive. I hope. So that's for the foreseeable future it'll be there. Whereas of course the teaching in the classroom or online is ephemeral, but you get direct contact with a small number of people, which is very pleasant and very enjoyable.
That's interesting that you have that sense of it that the teaching is more ephemeral. I almost feel like it's the opposite. I feel like a YouTube video has the lifespan of a fruit fly. People watch it.
Really?
Oh yeah, people watch it in the first 24 hours it's up and then completely forget it's there.
I found you 2017. I found your channel when I was miserable in a military school that it was a class I had to take, and I was just like I was bored out of my mind. I didn't really want to be there. Um, because it wasn't my main specialty in the military, but I had to take it. So okay. And I wanted something, and I was just desperate for something more educationally stimulating. And then I found your channel, and I watched the as many as I could of the back catalog for however long you had been making videos at that point. So those things are rather than ephemeral, they had a sudden impact. And anyone who discovers your channel can go back and watch any large playlist or every single one of your videos and learn a ton about Old Norse
Well, that's kind
and
of you.
how to
But
do mastery class at April Fool's videos.
but it's not the way that people mostly approach YouTube videos. Whereas I actually feel that the classes in a sense are less ephemeral because I mean people are devoting more of their time and financial resources to it. And I think that they, are those are the people who are more likely to be taking something with them that they'll revisit time and time again. Not to mention, I put the recordings of my lessons up, at least for people who are in the class, so they
Right.
can revisit them. So it's interesting that almost like we have a flipped sense of what's more ephemeral.
Well, let me give you something a positive note since we started talking about my father's memorial. Well,
Mm.
I did, and this ended up being nice idea. He was an artist, so I put his paintings around and the house. But also I realized, well, I I made videos for him years ago, starting like almost 20 years ago. I made videos for him on his YouTube channel, which the YouTube would end up not being a way for him to achieve any fame in his lifetime, despite his works and published collections throughout the decades. But what YouTube ended up not being the answer then. However, what was wonderful is that I did videos of like I interviewed him in some, or I talked with him, or it's just him talking, and they're all on. I put them up on his channel so that they could be there because I knew there would be a day where he wouldn't be around anymore. And understanding his artwork, which is abstract, there's one behind me, and it's kind of dark, so I forgot to turn on the other light. But if anyone's interested, you go to robertranieri.com and just it's just a gallery of the website. And you just look at his works,
That's
and a
cool.
lot of the inspiration comes from classical architecture, from ancient Roman architecture, and a number of other things like the natural world, gardens, and music, and a lot of other things. So really understanding them, though, no one could truly e describe them except him. And since he did, with he had 400 paintings, and he made 40 videos only. Um, that was not very much, but I realized, hey, I can make a playlist that plays on repeat. I'll put it here on the screen so when people come in, that kind of like when you go in a museum, you can see the video of the artist talking about the work, and you can look at that or the artwork, and so the whole time his voice and his expression was filling um, the space and was with us, which was great and, of course, incredibly touching. But also for that, which was most important to him in his career, which was his work, that lives on and was having an effect on people who hadn't, these are friends or family who maybe never bothered to look at his YouTube videos before, but there they were, admiring, enjoying, listening to him. He was finally having that audience with some people who never seen him, or those who did. Like for my case, I was delighted to see those videos again because I haven't seen them in a while, a couple of years, many of them, and I was relearning from him about his work, even though I'm probably the person alive who best understands his artwork. He was still able to teach me new things about it, even there, even though he's very much gone. So I would very say take heart. Absolutely, the direct impact on individual students in a classroom or tutoring one-on-one, you're going to have a much more extensive impact on the career of the learning of that individual, which is important and fantastic. But what you've done, which is an enormous corpus of Old Norse language topics from phonology to grammar to literature, um, is a library which others will enjoy, either a few or many people, hopefully forever. And that's great.
We'll see. Again, very kind of you. Um, the I mean, it's actually very touching, thinking of you having this library of YouTube videos of your father. I mean, to have that kind of multimedia. I mean, I treasure this one like 4-second clip that I have of my grandfather's voice, Like
Yeah.
it would be so much nice. It would be like I it's unthinkable in a way, but I guess by the time he passed, it still wasn't like normal. It wasn't really the smartphone era yet. Just everybody had video of everybody,
Yeah.
but that's great to have,
It
and
is.
I'm really glad that you do have that.
Mm.
Um, how cool, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
Mm. So
Well,
how's your teaching been going online?
well, I did my first experiment with this, which was teaching Old Norse for 16 weeks, um, 16 unbroken weeks, which is a lesson I learned probably not to do exactly that way again. 16 weeks from January to May. I had 183 people enroll,
Wow.
which, to judge from summer enrollments, that will probably never happen again. But that just shows how much pent up interest there had built up.
You had 183 people in a Zoom lesson at a time?
No, it was never that much because I split it into so
Okay. Makes
about
sense.
half of them were in the old world and about half of them were in the new world. So I did a Sunday afternoon one, which was mostly for new world participants, and then a Friday morning one, which is mostly for old world participants, because that was, Friday afternoon in Norway or Sweden. And but it would be the same content. So the Friday class and the Sunday class, I would teach the same thing.
Hmm.
No, I never had 183 people show up for any one, or even 91 or 92 people show up for either one, which is part of what was kind of interesting about it. I don't know how many people uh, stuck it through live, but it's probably close to a third of that. But at the same time, the people who didn't might have or might still be working through it because I did make all of the lectures available as recordings later to them.
Hmm.
And I'm letting people who are enrolled in the spring semester of the intro class come to the summer intro class without charging them again. So some of them may continue at a different pace than what I had set up as the live instructional pace. Um, but now I'm offering starting on June 2nd. I'll be doing that beginner class again, and then also a part two class. These will
Hmm.
be six. Hmm.
Good.
Yeah, these will be 16 weeks again. Although, I mean, the 16 weeks was originally built on the fact that my colleague Brenna Bird, have you met her, know her from the University of Kentucky?
It's
Andrew and Brenna.
familiar. Hmm.
They've been on my channel a couple times. They've been on
Yeah.
G&E actually, is where I thought you might have run into them.
Yeah.
Um, but she was going to teach an Old Norse class at the University of Kentucky this spring with my book. And since that was a 16-week semester, that's why I did 16 weeks so I could keep those parallel. So I also zoomed into her class at the University of Kentucky to see how that was going. Right. Um, and so in the summer, I'll do the 16 weeks again, although I'll have breaks after 5 weeks because I'm going to Iceland. So ironically, going to Iceland will be a pause in the Old Norse class. And then after 10 weeks, because I'm going to see Tyler Childers in concert. So I'm breaking it up, but I think those breakups at the 1/3 and 2/3 point, the week breaks will be good for everybody. A chance to consolidate. And I should have done something like that in the spring. Um, yeah, those are some lessons I learned. I also thought I was going to make them 1 hour lectures and quickly mostly did 1.5 or even 2 hour lectures. So that's also something I learned is that actually there's a huge contrast to teaching big classes at a university because like at the University of Colorado, my contract specified that every semester I had to teach a class of at least 180. Um, and my experience with classes that big, which I was sort of thinking about in planning this when I realized how many people were going to be at it in the spring, I thought, oh, well, that means it'll go really fast. These will be really short because, and I think I was thinking about it like doing it in those big lecture halls because people are so uninterested. There's such a like peer pressure and that many students all put together to like not be interested, not raise your hand, not make this any longer, not, feed the instructor
But
anything.
they want to be there, and they're more cognizant of the whereas in a university there's a pretty intense separation from between what you're paying for the university and you're paying for this class. You don't really
Oh
think
yeah.
about exactly how much dollars you're paying per hour or per lecture or things like that. But it's more apparent, and therefore people come and they want to, and they know they're paying for something that's worthwhile. So they're going to pay attention, interact, and ask questions. But a lot of them did.
Yeah. So that made a big difference. Um, it I learned other lessons through this. One was, we after the especially after the first few weeks, we would be doing a lot of reading, and uh, I I learned to not just take the first person who volunteered each time because sometimes you just get the same person who's going to volunteer to read, 10 times in a row, and it's like, well, that's not.
Nah, I gotta pick on people.
Yeah, so I started using dice to decide. I
That's
would tell
nice.
people, tell me that you're ready, right? But then I would select randomly from the people who said they were ready. That was a nice innovation. That was actually similar to something I would do in language classroom. Yeah, it was all right. And I had considered doing the the nature method, the way that ALI uh, does this, actually uh, basically teaching in Old Norse. But I think both my personality and teaching style it's just two at odds with. Um, and I think Old Norse is a harder language to do that with than Latin and Old English. Not saying it's easy to do. Not saying that what you do is easy. Just saying that Latin is a little bit better positioned for an English language audience who will intuitively recognize more vocabulary than they will in Old Norse, even though Old Norse is technically a closer related language. It's not
Hmm.
as intuitively recognizable, I think. Maybe I'm wrong.
That's interesting because we in Asian languages we do Hebrew also completely full immersion, and Hebrew has almost alphabet to the majority of vocabulary. Almost nothing is recognizable, and Greek is easier than that, but it's still
Yeah, those you're right.
pretty out there.
Those two are not any definitely not any easier than Old Norse. So I mean it could be done. It would take somebody with a different personality and probably a different, I don't know, academic orientation in some ways. Like I'm pretty good, I think maybe students could correct me on this, but I think I'm pretty decent at explaining grammar, and there's a lot of complicated grammar in Old Norse. Could I do that in Old Norse? I don't know. And I also think that it would just be, again, just such a personality conflict. I would, there would be days when I would just not be in the mood at all. Just to shout at people in Old Norse.
Thad meltem in moder, hat mir skilde kaupa.
It's interesting because you or Colin Gorey, for example, who of course I've also talked to at ALI. I mean, you have to have such a productive capability with the language, right? Um, you're, you're because you can't anticipate every single thing that you're going to have to say in Latin, right?
Right.
That's
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think it's because I've gotten the chance to teach in an active way, active lessons at seminars in Italy and in the US. Teachers who have taught in a grammar translation method their whole life, but they want to try this thing out. So they're suddenly in the position of being a student and in a very uncomfortable way.
yeah,
They're in their classroom, say it's, some Latin teacher from a high school who's been teaching, junior, senior, upper level Latin for years and knows everything about the grammatical and vocabulary dissections of the first three books of the Aeneid, or whatever. They know their stuff. At least they know exactly what they teach really well, and it's all good and important stuff. But then come to this environment where they like University of Kentucky is one of these great examples, the Lexington Convention. And you sign a jus jurandum, an oath that you're only going to speak Latin for this whole 8-day period with any of the participants and in the classes, and that's all the teachers speak, and you're suddenly immersed in this environment. You're like, wow. And your brain is going a mile a minute, um, because and if you are one of these Latin teachers, for example, because you have all this knowledge, which is just in a different, it's there, but it's in a different part of the brain and it doesn't have this active stimulus yet. It hasn't been stimulated in this way before, but then it happens. And then after 1, 2, 3 days or more of this practice in that highly intense situation, they sort of they come to life and they're able to express themselves and put words together, and they're able to see. It's difficult because it takes a kind of humility to recognize that there's all this incredible um, capacious amount of knowledge, and yet there's a particular proficiency in this case, maybe listening, which listening is more important anyway than speaking. And you'll always be able to speak faster than your students, which is great. You don't have to worry about uh, about that. And you're the teacher, so that's something too that's often been encouraged. Listen, you're the teacher. It doesn't they're going to be if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. You can correct and to let them know, oh no, it's like this. And they'll be like, oh, okay. And they'll be like, oh, it's like this is wait, use the dative by accident instead of the ablative. And then, oh, well, then you say, oh, I meant this. Volevamo hoc digere. And then, but because that's what normal people do in their native languages. We make mistakes
right.
all the time. And wait, that's not what I meant. I meant this, especially in languages that are highly inflected. Often, a speaker, I've seen this all the time in Italian. They'll end up, saying the gender of some adjective which corresponds to a previous noun, or vice versa, where they have an adjective that's anticipating a noun, but they change their mind on the noun. And I don't know, I know this is bizarre, but it's a bella. They say in the first part of the phrase, and they get the trionfo, and then wait, and a bel trionfo, and then they correct it. But it's not really correcting so much as the normal way that people inherently and spontaneously correct themselves in speech. So it's really not that different. And
Sure.
when you're in the environment and the training of precision, and you told me in past that there's a lot of that kind of, there's just like with Gothic, for example, there's just the Gothic Bible, and anything beyond that is simply not permitted to be formulated or written or discussed because it's not the literal Bible in this case in Gothic, and therefore is verboten in a sensitive way. So when you have that kind of mindset, the language doesn't have its natural qualities, and therefore one doesn't necessarily feel inclined to teach it that way either. So I get the feeling, and but exists also of course in the classics community, and it's also a challenging discussion or persuasion to have to people who haven't, because the majority of the teaching of Latin and ancient Greek around the world is still grammar translation, even though that's changing little by little. It's not, it's not easy to change that inveterated habit.
Do you feel like there's a trend toward adopting more natured method?
Yeah, yeah, nature method, or how do we call it? It's essentially some level of language immersion and comprehensible input. It would be so there because there's different things that one can do and different expectations. For example, in a first semester course of Latin at a university, you're probably going to hit lines of the Aeneid, a bunch of other poets and authors, Caesar for sure, probably by the middle of the semester, in the first semester. Whereas if you do take a approach like we do at Ancient Language Institute, you're not going to hit any literature in the first semester at all, probably. Maybe the teacher could bring in some little quotes of something if they want to, because you're building a foundation, and it's a very, very different. Instead of trying to, because grammar translation seems like it's a way to skip right to the good stuff. You get right to the poetry, you get right to the literature that's so popular and so famous. And here's what you need to do, the bare elements you need to understand that. And it can do that, but it's a different thing. Like the way I like my Coptic, which is very poor. The only resources I have had until recently, still published a book recently, which is a Total Physical Response Method book. The only resource I had were just grammars, and they're written in English, and I'm just reading them, and I'm learning things. But man, it's amazing how different it is when you learn grammar in the target language, whether the book or the teacher is explaining the grammatical concept to you in the language. It's I don't know, 10 times better, 20 times better. I'm just making up numbers, but it is noticeable when you learn about it and then you don't use it, you don't get back to it. The grammatical concepts, the explanations wither. Um,
Hmm.
they wither in the memory, and then you don't have them after a short time. Whereas I remember where I learned certain grammar things in Latin especially, but also ancient Greek, Old English now, because the discussion itself was an event. And having that context ended up imprinting the grammar, which is interesting because that's exactly what Krashen and Bill Van Patten and these other and many studies on language acquisition have demonstrated that grammar is not a subject that ought not to be taught. It absolutely should be, and they found that, or certainly could be, depends on the researcher or the professor, I suppose. Some advocate it more, and others less. But the yeah, they found that that's the consistent thing. If you learn about the dative case, if you learn in English, okay, you'll learn something, and maybe you'll remember something about the ending in Latin. But if you learn about the casus dativus in Latin, and you have all the context Latin, for whatever reason, I don't have, there's no clear explanation given to explain the phenomenon, but the phenomenon is that grammar explained in the target language works better. Now, it doesn't mean you have to use the terminology. Like you could if you're like if you ever want to do this, which I'm not trying to persuade you, you can do whatever you want. But if you were, because of course it's difficult, what should you use for these grammar terms? I guess you could use the Icelandic terms for dative and
Yeah,
accusative and all that because they're pretty much all the same.
yeah, I'd probably just import that wholesale
Right.
from Icelandic. Yeah.
And if not, you can always just, what is dative in Icelandic? I don't know if that's, off the top of
Uh,
your head. Or
Thagufas.
Dagufar, and then say, and write dative next to it. And you could still talk about, uh, you know, you still say, use the word, these grammar terms that might be useful in English. But the structure, the syntax of the discussion is still in that. For whatever reason, the studies show, and my personal experience also show that you just remember it better, the grammar. I don't know why. Because you
Well,
think that you get a clear explanation in your native language, it should stick better, but it doesn't, evidently.
I mean, I see it in modern language instruction. And in fact, I imported a couple little things from the way Icelandic is taught or the way Icelanders talk about Icelandic into the
Hmm.
way I taught Old Norse. So, for
That's
example,
cool.
you can learn, you can learn tables the way that anyone learns tables from a textbook, corvus, corum, corvi, corvo, corvi, right?
Yes, you Germanics use the accusative seconds. Sure.
Yeah, that's just how I tend to think of it now.
No, I'm
Where,
just kidding. You use the nominative accusative is fine.
but in Icelandic, one way that people remember these is they say, um, to translate it, here here is a raven about a raven from a raven to a raven, and that's
That's
gets
the
you nominative,
that's good.
accusative, dative, genitive. So that's
I
what I try to get people to do in flashcards early on.
I remember you doing that in the videos, and I thought like, oh, that's what the Russians do.
Oh, is
Russian
it?
and Ukrainian, they teach that way when they teach their own children.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
it puts it in more context than just a bare table does,
yeah.
and I think that's one of the most important things uh, about getting exposed to natural language early on is getting some context because so often, I'm not. The thing is, I find myself kind of in one of these, typical, pleasing nobody positions because I find that a lot of the traditional grammar translation instruction is inadequate, right? It doesn't give you enough context. It's very stale, and then not quite being able to embrace the the nature method. Again, partially that's possibly just a personality thing. Some of it is a little bit of having grown in a tradition of grammar translation method, but part of it is also like, God, can I stand to sit around and talk in Old Norse for now?
Doesn't
Like,
sound like fun to you? If
does
you
not
could
sound
do
like
it,
fun to me.
why?
I think it probably would have 10 years ago, right? 11 to 12 years ago. But no, but now, like, absolutely not. Like, that does not sound like fun.
Well, I'd love to explore this. Why not?
Well, we don't have to put me on a couch. Like, it's just, I got to a point where this became work, right? Like
So it's not fun anymore.
yeah,
Oh,
right. I mean, I can probably like it's somewhere in my UCLA days that switch flipped.
I
Um,
get that.
and there's just no turning that back on where it's like, like shit, I translated Star Wars in Old Norse, man.
I love that
That was,
translation. It's
yeah.
glorious.
But that's not something I could do now, or
Well,
would do.
but which is all is very fair. Have you ever had the opportunity to take an entire semester-long course that's full immersion in an ancient language or an old language?
Never done it. No. Well, I
Maybe
sat
you
in.
should try something easy like Latin, see if you like that whole thing and see if or ancient Greek or Hebrew, or whatever's available out there on the internets and see if you like it and if it does stimulate that interest. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Just if you think you'd hate it, then don't bother. But I
No,
guess it's the don't knock it till you try it kind of thing. Because I would not expect you
I'm
to
not.
just spontaneously invent a whole natural language Old Norse way of teaching without even seeing an example in some other ancient language first.
Sure, and I'm not knocking it, to be clear. I think it's perfectly fine and legitimate as a way to teach. It's just something that's hard for me to do. Um, and I've sat in on some of the lessons that you and Colin Gorey were doing in Old English.
Hmm.
I mean, I've seen the idea. Um, and I also think, there's room in this world for lots of different ways of teaching.
Sure.
I think there's like personally, I don't know how you originally learned Latin, but I originally learned Latin very much from that grammar translation method.
Right. I took how did I come about it? My path was German in high school, so I had basic conversational fluency in high school. I wanted to learn Latin. Some old books in the house they were like grammar books that belonged to I guess my dad's older brother, whom I didn't get to know. But he left some old books about Latin and grammar. I was like, oh, interesting. Maybe I want to take Latin someday. Though I really wanted to take Italian. And then I ended up taking a semester at the university, and I just hated it. I was able to ace everything because it's just, it's dative, genitive, whatever, all the cases. It's more inflected than German, but that kind of case thing I was familiar with. So that didn't throw me. Plus, I already knew a little bit of Italian, and it was easy to pick up vocabulary. It was interesting, but just the Wheelock's book, a grammar and translation book, the best and most famous of that type of book, but not going to take you so far. And but I just hated it because like, oh, this is boring. Like this is not how languages learn because I already learned some conversational Italian and German in high school, so I knew what that was, and I was like, I want to. Why is the teacher? Does this teacher not speak anything in the language? Like why is there not more? Why is there no conversation? Like it's just these are. I was very naive because I didn't understand all these intricacies and pedagogy and all those things. Um, but I just wanted to learn to speak it. Then I found Familia Romana. I read it cover to cover. I transcribed the whole thing, and then I had reading fluency in 3 months and was able to hold down a conversation. Um, and then I just was hooked. So yeah, that's a very different way to get connected to a language. Whereas with the ancient Greek, it has been much more of a struggle because almost every available textbook, even if it tries to do something like that Famiglia Romana book, then something like that's like a nature method book, almost every one of them out there that currently exists utterly fails. And then they're just grammar translation books anyway, and they with a veneer of something that's more context based. And for that reason, my ancient Greek really suffers
Hmm.
because it was that concentration and focus on the all the grammatical details um, has for me at least blocked my ability to gain um, the reading fluency that I would expect to have at this point, which is interesting. But I found some ways to compensate for that, which I've talked about in videos and things. But yeah,
Yeah, and I don't think that there's anything like the materials available for Latin and Greek. I mean, Athanase is just not as good as Familia Romana,
no,
which
it's
isn't to
not.
say which isn't to say Athanase is bad. Um,
Depends what criteria are used to judge it by. But yes, I mean, I use Athanase. I've been rereading the second volume now because it's Athanase is a wonderful textbook for ancient Greek if you already know ancient Greek. So in my case, I already know ancient Greek, so I'm able to read. I'm able to learn. Like, oh, I get this. It's because you already had what
yeah,
it doesn't provide enough foundation on its own, but now that I've acquired a foundation through much struggle,
I hear what you're saying.
uh,
I mean,
yeah, it's much better.
it was actually what I used. It was always used in my classrooms in ancient Greek. Um, I won't say that it's exactly what I learned ancient Greek from because I studied it a fair amount on my own before that, but like I already knew Latin,
Right.
so wasn't that yeah. But I think this is actually a huge challenge for anybody trying to come up with some kind of nature method type text. Is like, are you just making something that looks good to someone who already knows it? One one of the best things for me about teaching this past spring was actually getting all this real-time feedback on this textbook that I've been working on. Like what does work before what? What do I need to say
Yeah.
before I say what? That feedback was fantastic to get that from students.
Yeah.
I mean, that, and that's actually, I guess I forgot to mention that as a key part of the spring teaching was it was the first time that I got to test out this Old Norse textbook that I have been working on
That's awesome.
for quite a while. Yeah.
Boy,
So,
that's great. I strongly encourage any teacher with a book to be able to test the earlier version or the first version or any version with students because you learn a lot. You're able to perfect a lot that way.
yeah, it's a risk, because you put something out there, and of course, you could find it floating around somewhere later. But um,
All
I
books,
feel like,
when you have second or third edition, it's just heightens their status.
yeah, well,
Ooh, this is the sixth edition.
sick. Oh my God. I I feel like, people more or less buy books on the honor system these days anyway, right? I mean, if you Google my name, the first thing Google tries to fill in is PDF, right? Um,
I'm a
so
proud owner of, I think, all of your books, except the new textbook.
well, so now
Um,
you. And I don't know what kind of timeline to expect on that.
okay,
We shall see. I've sent it to Hackett,
good.
but don't have any feedback or word on next steps yet.
Hmm.
Um, and in the meantime, now that I'm working on the second class, I've thought about drawing up some lessons that would be kind of in similar format to the first one. So I might
Hmm.
actually make the textbook longer, just add some of those in,
Yeah,
like
why
just
not?
depending on when Hackett gets back to me. Because I mean, when you when you end a textbook like that, it's pretty arbitrary.
Yeah,
So
the language doesn't stop at the final chapter.
no. And one thing I thought that I would mention that I was really happy with my spring class was how relatively quickly people were ready to read real text.
Hmm.
Because I feel like in Old Norse, obviously the language I'm most familiar with this, but also I've seen it in lots of other classes, Latin and Greek and Gothic, Old Church Slavic, Armenian, whatever. There's like almost this trepidation, even though it's like, oh no, it's verboten to write original text. It's like this trepidation about introducing you to real original text. Like, oh my
Hmm.
God, like, can you really do this? I think my students were reading real original text like in the fifth week.
Good.
Like
Yeah.
it's, hey, you're not going to understand everything. You're going to have to look up a lot of words sometimes, and part of what I try to equip people to do is realize what word to look up,
Mm.
which is a big challenge with Old Norse because there's so much umlaut.
Yep.
Um, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. I mean, like people actually, I think sometimes we're not confident enough in the intelligence of students who are really motivated. Um, sure, it would take a long time to get people who weren't motivated to that point, but in a class like that, everyone is there because they want to be.
Exactly.
So, you
Oh,
know,
they'll follow your lead. Absolutely. And that's the great thing about the class, the
well,
classroom.
and with Old Norse, a lot of the reason anyone wants to learn it is because they want to read these classics.
Yeah.
So why not let people get a taste of that as early as possible? Is my attitude.
Well, I have other colleagues, including Kefalos actually, who advocate getting to primary source ancient Greek as soon as possible. One of the reasons is that all of the textbooks, including Athanase, either are so replete with mistakes or are highly unnatural or just not helpful that if that really all that because they're still teaching obviously using the language actively but they're supplying it through the conversation in class. They're filling all that in, some basic commands and things like that. They're filling that in a lot easier, especially in person, but also possible online. And then you want to get to those primary sources as soon as you can so that you can um, not depend on essentially inferior resources, which is every ancient Greek textbook out there.
Hmm.
And then get to the that primary stuff because that's so you won't because it ends up being potentially unhelpful. That's their opinion. I don't necessarily I see a lot of value in that opinion too. But I also see the advantages of other approaches. But yeah, but getting I mean it's encouraging and it's fun, especially if you start to learn, let's say ancient Greek in a way that is if for a reason that you want, like if you want to read the Bible and you're getting quotes from John, you could probably look at a quote from John on the first day.
Mhm.
Or and certainly by week five, absolutely, you could look at original stuff very quickly. And that can be really fun and encouraging. Or if you can find definitely little phrases here and there from taken from Heraclitus potentially or Plato, especially if it's modified slightly or simplified. You can like, oh wow. I mean, just being able to read Guy, which means and, is exciting. If it's in the original, like I know that means and,
Mhm. Mhm.
or the article, I could read that. That's whole. That's the, that could be fun.
Well, and giving people those little bits of encouragement is so important. I mean, and you can accomplish it different ways, right? I mean, the nature method partially accomplishes it by getting you invested in a story that keeps going, right? So
If it's a story-based narrative,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
but like Familia Romana as an
Like Fumito
example,
Romana, yeah.
Oswald the Bear, Colin Gore's Old English story is
Oh
another
yeah.
example. Um, or in my system, just like, well, next we're going to read, this thing from the Poetic Edda or the Prose Edda, like just, try to keep people interested. You want them to feel like they're getting rewards throughout the process and that you're not just like, laboring like monks up the hill, bashing yourselves with your Old Norse grammar. Um, and at the top, there's some, you know, experience that will take you away. I like you want to give people encouragement as they go.
Just thinking, Dona nobis
Right.
nordicam. Boom.
That's that's about what I was picturing. Did you see my original Latin chant with the transferring of the Stegosaurus relics?
Oh no, I did it. I'll
It's
have to
it's
look at
there.
it. I apologize. I know you told me about it, but you know how busy I
Oh
was
yeah, yeah.
unfortunately these days. But now I got time. Hold on. Jackson. Wait, what's the title of it?
Well, it was one of my shorts. It would have been just in late April or
Ooh,
early May.
ooh, a
Stegosaurus,
short.
the Stegosaurus Day relics. Um,
Okay, good.
because
Shorts are easy to find.
we
Got it.
took the type specimen of Stegosaurus and we were moving the bones. I thought, everyone's handling them very carefully, and it just reminded me of something like that. So I made up a sort of Gregorian chant for him.
Oh, good. I can't wait. That'll be fun.
It's it's kind of dumb. You forget, like I started all this with Aladdin. Like
I,
I'm not a
I
stranger to Aladdin.
oh, you're no, not at all. You're right with the Latin.
Well, I mean, it's been a long time since I spent tons of time with Aladdin, but I certainly encounter it pretty often in my daily life. Um, and I learned Latin like, man, I can remember sitting in the classroom my first year and not really understanding how any of this worked, right? And there was a book that I got, like for someone gave me for Christmas because I like the family knew that I was getting into languages, and I cannot remember what it was called. And there's so many different Latin textbooks that like I've looked for it since and just not been able to
Hmm.
find it since. But I read through this book and it explained things in such a way in English that
Hmm.
I was like, oh, right. And like suddenly I got it, even though my teachers never really explained it to me.
Mm.
Like this book explained it well enough. And I wish I could figure out what that book was. Like, but the only thing I'd recognize is the cover, and I've never seen the cover again.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I had there's a book I know for ancient Greek that gave me that. It's called Ancient Greek Alive.
hmm,
Once I read that, it was I all kinds of it was because when you have really good clear explanations in very plain English about certain things that otherwise might be obscure. It's very helpful. Certainly, I can speak for the Greek situation because you have certain complexities about this or that, like word order, for example. What's this into?
sure.
Why is it? What's this in this order? But it's clearly not. There's some reason. Wait, does it have to be this order? I've only seen. And then there's a way to explain that. Well, there's no. You could say um huios tes Pilipes, or you say ho tes Pilipes, huios. You can do all kinds of different orders, and they do have nuance differences, but it's not like one is right or wrong. I remember that being explained in the book, like, oh, now I can relax.
Yeah, yeah.
That helped.
Right. And sometimes like Greek actually I think is very similar to Old Norse in some ways because there's just points that you reach where the student who's totally new to the stuff says, "What?" Right? You know? And
Yep.
and with
Yep.
Greek, with Greek, I mean, I can remember having this reaction. It's like, how is this and that the same verb? Right? It's like this is this you're
Oh, the suppletive verbs. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
Like,
Idon from horao.
yeah, it's like how like what? And then Old Norse does something similar because you have actually there's some suppletive paradigms, but it's more like just umlaut is rendered different forms of the same root, just unrecognizable.
Boy, that is a big one. Yeah, just talking about because there's always a place for explicit language teaching, not just intuitive and immersion, but especially having a very explicit explanation of suppletive verbs, or the umlauting, especially in Old Norse, but the suppletive verbs in Greek, because Latin has a couple, and it's like, oh, ferotuli. Whoa, that's weird. Well, I bet I'll never see another classical language. There's a weird thing like that. Then you get to ancient Greek, and I just have a list of the suppletive verbs. I have at least 12. I decided, okay, I just need to memorize these, and I did, and then I was always able to recognize them. It wasn't a problem anymore. Like pero becomes enenka and the aorist, goes. So I carried. Like it's totally different. Which is the same as going whence. However, when it happens, what's so nice is when that's something I don't think I've ever seen. Maybe ancient Greek alive, but like have a really important, like these suppletive verbs are incredibly important. You should really just memorize how these things fit together. I don't think I've ever seen one that really joins some of the important verbs that are suppletive one to the other. For example, ancient Greek ditami, which means I put, is it's passive is not well, there is a passive form of that verb, but it's like, well, most of the time, which is also not said in so many words, and it should be. Well, most of the time, that's how the text was written. Most of the time, it's getai. It's getai for it was put there. That's the passive version of that. That's what that should be, not the past version of the original root verb. And it's highly irritating because you come across these tidbits, they're not clearly explained. And then because that's the kind of thing that really should be explicitly, whoa, hey, newbie to this language. This is really important. Now you're ready, whether you're explaining in ancient Greek or in English or whatever. Like being like alarms going off, lights. This is super important. Memorize the heck out of this because you're gonna need it. And I didn't get that until, well, it was never too late, but much later than I ought.
Well, and I think there's also a natural tendency if you're directing your own study probably toward steering away from these things because they're kind of hard, right? It's like,
Hmm.
I mean, there's just a natural human tendency to say, oh, well, I get this a little bit better. I'm going to learn this better. I think part of what you need good instructors for is saying, like, look, I know this is hard, but you've got to learn this early, right? And those suppletive paradigms in Greek are an
You do that
example.
with the prepositions in Old Norse. I loved that. I thought that was great. Hey, here, this is what these words mean. These little words mean. Memorize them. It was a list of 20 or so words.
Oh, in the videos.
Yeah, in your video lessons. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I
Because
did
then
a little bit differently in the textbook. The first few weeks in the class are focused very heavily on just like let's understand cases, right?
hmm
And like let's like and teaching it sort of through English first, right? Like these are
Yeah,
not it's not that there is something different going on in Old Norse grammar exactly. It's that something is being expressed differently that is expressed in English. It's just coded differently,
right.
right? Trying to explain that and getting people to apply these terms to English before they learn another language, I think is the way
Mm,
to go.
yeah.
Um, what was I going to say? There was something I was going to say. I took off that. Now I don't remember what.
I was talking about suppletive verbs and you in umlauting in Old Norse.
Yeah, uh, I don't know, but it's. I guess at the end of the day, I don't know why it's doing the Zoom thumb up.
No,
I
I
guess
got my
anytime
computer
you
does
do
it
this,
too.
Oh, look at that.
Isn't that great? Hey, it's an Apple thing. It's the Macs
Oh,
do
that's
that. You
absurd.
can turn it off. I just forgot. It distracts me every time. I did use it in one of my videos recently because I found, hey, I can use this. This saves me the special effects budget.
So if I do this, does it depict like hell behind?
Oh,
Whoa,
wow. I've never seen that one before. I've never been so cross to have to do that.
that was weird. Did this do
It'll do it
something?
in a QuickTime movie too, or in if you're just recording yourself.
What about mixing? Oh, I confused it for a second.
Yeah. It it's obviously it sees you as a glass half empty kind of a guy.
It's probably true. But but in spite of that, I actually think that the Old Norse class went pretty okay. I mean, again, enrollments for the summer so far, nothing like the enrollments for the spring. So I might have just blown through a lot more of my demand than I
Hmm.
realized I was blowing through. But it seemed like at the end, I think people had reached the point that I wanted them to reach, at least the people that I interacted with the most, that I could judge, the abilities of most easily.
Yeah.
People were reading prose. Um, I think that the real test is people were reading prose they had not seen prior to me showing it to them.
Hmm.
Right. So like I could actually say like, oh, let's practice with some stuff you haven't seen. And people were working it out. They were figuring out what to look up with unfamiliar words, which again, a huge part of teaching Old Norse that I think is often not even like attempted to be taught.
Hmm.
The hardest
Yeah.
skill with learning Old Norse is probably learning how to use the Old Norse dictionary.
It's
Uh,
not easy for Greek either. You have
oh,
to you got it's
100%.
thankfully there's some online dictionaries, but like I
Man,
have a whole it took me
nobody,
years to get a flow, but I have a flow
yeah,
now.
nobody taught me how to use an ancient Greek dictionary. And I was a grad student in Greek classes, right? Like trying to use like the Oxford Classical Greek Dictionary. It's like,
I still
man,
got that one back here.
yeah, not that useful. Or just like going up on Perseus and trying to type and look for like, I wish someone had actually explicitly taught me to do that. In grad school, one of the best classes I actually took was one that was just called like Aims and Methods of Scholarship. That was just like how to be a scholar. And it was really, really useful. Like
Hmm.
it was actually
I
nice to just have someone highlight like this is how you like find articles that you should read and stuff like that.
I'd love to see that.
It was a good class. I wish someone
Yeah.
had taught a freaking dictionary how to use a dictionary class. Because I had to basically teach
Wow.
myself that, but now I'm trying to spare my students that trouble and say, like, let's actually look at how to use dictionaries early on.
That's a great skill. You need that skill. I mean, yeah, I learned that a whole bunch of new dictionary skills recently myself from another teacher. Like, oh, that's how you do the Logeon website for ancient Greek has an inverse function.
Oh,
So, and I just used it today spontaneously because I wanted to. For example, uh, there's a random verb which I heard for the first time today in a different lesson. There's a verb which is ateniao, which means I long to go to Athens. It's this desirative suffix that's apparently productive. And when I heard productive, I just immediately went to the Logion inverse button, and now I can see there's a whole bunch of verbs I'm looking at right now. There's all of these iao suffixed verbs. There's at least 20 or 30 of them that are all attested and are desiderative. And apparently it's productive, which is interesting. So I can see verbs that are actually used. So that's why I can use them when I speak ancient Greek or when I write to express desire to do a thing. So maybe you can invent like if you have Athenai is Athens, so Rome, Rom uh Romeo could theoretically be a way to say I long to go to Rome, you know.
oh, I wish to get my Rome on. I wish to get
I,
my Athens on.
let's get our Rome on. Yeah, that's right.
That's it sounds like it's the
Yeah.
equivalent to that sort of permission. That's
Yeah.
cool.
And
And of course,
that's a good digital dictionary thing to learn, or how to use the thesaurus of. I just was translating it into saying it in English, but no, the name is in Latin. It's Thesaurus Linguae Graecae. It's TLG, the thesaurus of the Greek language, and like how to use that. Not easy.
hmm,
You gotta practice, or you have someone actually teach you. I remember when someone told me, "Oh, just use this." I'm like. Oh, I really wish someone could teach me how to use this. But I poked around and I was desperate because the equivalent Latin one, which is PHI, the Packard Humanities Institute, so easy.
Hmm.
It's you can just type in any Latin word or phrase and it'll find um it's much easier to search and you can find the in context of the ancient, all the classical literature, any phrase or something. You can even the also useful if you're trying to see what the Romans say about ancient Greek, you type in the word beta, beta, eta, tau, alpha, and you have Quintilian talking about the pronunciation of the letter and those kinds of things. Really, it's like, wow,
Hmm.
super useful. And the Greek equivalent digital one is not as intuitive. You have to practice and
That
poke around.
there's an Old Norse dictionary of that exact kind under production, not yet ready, that I've encouraged my students to use to the extent that it's ready. The Dictionary of Old Norse Prose at the University of
Yeah.
Copenhagen.
Well,
But
that's good.
once it's ready, it's going to be a great tool.
Well, I mean, the people who make those things, especially when they're free or at low cost, God bless them because they are sorely needed. I mean, I think it's amazing too how easy it is for me to like even using Perseus is fantastic, but not that easy to use for has Latin and
Not
ancient
easy.
Greek.
Yeah, not easy.
No, but thank God it's now I'm used to it. It's fine. But like the Latin library, of course, is super easy, and it's just like if I just want to go, I wonder like what's that Horace poem, and I'll go and you can just poke around and I can find it really quickly. Or yeah, so that's advantageous.
I see that there's some comments on dictionaries in the chat there.
Yeah,
It's like this,
we've
these are things
excited discussion.
people can get feelings about this. Like,
Yeah,
my students in the Old Norse class developed feelings early on about Gudbrandur Vigfússon dictionary from like 1874 and all of its
the most recent of the Old Norse dictionaries.
I don't think it's the most recent, but it's the most complete. The problem is that it's super idiosyncratic. Like the guy has this picture in his head of what Old Norse should be, and it's not exactly like any real Old Norse text.
Oh, it's a shame.
Right, he wants to modernize some things and then super archaize other things, and you never quite know which
Oh God, sounds like Catarefusa.
it is basic. Yeah, right. He was trying. I think that's. I hadn't thought about it, but it's almost parallel to that. He was trying to construct like an
Oh,
Asinic Catharavusa, and it's sort of tortuous sometimes.
wow.
Yeah.
Weird connection.
So on top of learning how to use a dictionary, you have to learn like how did this guy think? Right.
Oh yeah. The LSJ, the ancient Greek one, is so much harder to use than Lewis and Short, the Latin one, because it crams all the soup. This information you absolutely need to at least be able to read, and some stuff you need to find, like finding the aorist form. But it
Hmm.
doesn't just tell you the principal parts. You have to hunt them because it only shows you what's been attested, and not every part's attested necessarily. Or you have to figure it out. Oh, it's this way in Ionic, so well, I guess this is how it should be in Attic Koine.
Uh,
Thanks. But
wow.
sometimes it has super useful things like say the word for son in as in a child son in which is huyos and the plural is huyoi except in Attic, which is weird because you're studying Greek and you think, well, am I not studying Attic? It's like, well, no, you're studying textbook Greek, and that's not actually what what's what's here. So like the it's not like the dative isn't huyoi, it's huyi. It's
Hmm.
an Attic until like 350 AD when Koine, or later after 350 AD, when Koine is starting to become this, important international language. And then the Attic form changes, seemingly adopting the common Greek form. Stuff that it's buried in there in that top of that dictionary entry, and it's like you take a textbook and it teaches you that standard, like if it's a grammar translation or a Athanasier or whatever, it says, huyui, and it says huyai is the dative, and you just believe it, not knowing that that's wrong.
Right. Right.
It's just a lie.
Oh, there's an example of that in just about every grammar of Old Norse. Um, so not, not not trying to get into the weeds, but the word is,
Hmm.
right? So in archaic Old Norse, it's s,
Hmm.
obvious cognitive English. Later it becomes
Right.
uh, by analogy with other forms that have an r in them, eru in the plural.
Mm.
So you are, like thou art,
Hmm.
is thu ert.
Hmm.
So it always has that R, right? Because it's
Nice.
cognitive English, thou art. But in like the 1920s, um, writing his Grammar of Old Norse, Adolf Norrain decided, well, ert must be from est. It must be parallel to est becoming air, even though there's no tested est. But this ghost form that's not in any text, just bleeds into every grammar and every discussion of this language. Like, oh yes, you watch for this archaic form that doesn't exist. Right?
Really? Well, what the archaic version of Ert?
Hmm?
The archaic version of Ert?
Yeah, thou art through ert, but
So
it's just
what
it's always ert.
what is the archaic form that they say instead of Ert?
Est
Erst?
parallel to est becoming air. They say
Like
est became ert.
oh, like du bist, I guess.
Yeah, but it doesn't exist. It's never there. This was actually the subject of my very first published article. I got so frustrated with this as a grad student that I was like, this doesn't exist. Why do we why do we talk about this?
Boy, that's wretched.
So,
How
but
is
I
that,
still see people quoting it all the time. So
and especially just comparing it to Old English, there's
yeah,
no
like
reason to think it
right.
was there.
There's an obvious parallel, and like, are you saying that Old English came from Aost or something? Like, well, like there's no reason to postulate that. I don't
Yeah.
know. It drives me crazy. Um, but it sometimes, especially in languages that have relatively fewer resources, like Old Norse, you just get these like weird establishment, if you will, ideas that just last forever because everybody's reading the same books for 120 years.
That happens in everything. I've been reading, unrelated at all, completely. I was reading things about nutritional science and how, and other things, other sciences. Just there's stuff that is still taught, had nothing to do with the language disciplines that are still reiterated as gospel truth, practically. Like, well, this is an established fact. Like, doctors will say these things and they're completely false.
Yeah.
Um, it's insane. It's really shocking.
Yeah, this
Um,
is one of my biggest problems with Wikipedia is that so often they'll cite things just because they're easy to find in this public domain, right? So they cite some public domain translation of something where it's like, God, this, there's 8 translations since this that all correct this error, right?
yeah,
It's like, just because this is
yeah.
the public domain one, it's the one that you cite, and of course now too, like Wikipedia isn't even the worst problem with this. Now it's just that people who want to read a text are like, oh, I'm going to find the free one. Well, the free one is from 1880. So
I'm using archaizing English no less, I'm sure.
yeah, so there's often that. Plus, there may be, outdated ideas, outdated ideologies that are kind of leaking into this. Um, there's a lot of problems sometimes with these older texts, and
Yeah.
that's part of why I believe that modern translations should be, affordably priced and not textbook priced.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
which is a problem. Like with the Vedas, there's better translations than most people ever see that are available, but they're 400 freaking dollars because they're published through some academic press.
What's the mission of your YouTube channel?
Yeah, well,
Providing
right.
a library for people to access as they will.
Well, and you too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think we have similar missions.
I have, well, yes, and I have to really just nail down which project to do because I have so many
But
as
that's
far
not a
as,
bad problem to have. I
no, that's
mean,
fine. Yeah.
one thing that I think you and I both have not suffered from is running out of things to talk about.
That is true.
Sometimes
Yeah.
it surprises me. It's like, and I go through periods where I'm more or less creative, but still haven't just utterly run out of topics.
Oh, yeah. Well, I certainly haven't. Yeah, I mostly run into the problem of just lack of time to explore at enough depth, this or that, or I've will soon, I hope, be getting back into the ancient Greek in action courses and or not courses, the videos I was making, but just do them very differently because I made those because I have to reformat them completely, what I want to do in the future.
Hmm.
Original 12 videos there, if I don't know if you saw, but they were made uh basically to help my students be able to get it to start a Athenaze, because Athenaze starts up here. My joke is that it's Famiglia Romana is like this slight leisurely path, this little walk. And Athenaze is like, okay, well, to start your hike, you have to spontaneously leap up this 12-foot cliff and then keep leaping from it's not holding your hand. It's this
Yeah.
is the Sherpas way ahead of you. Good luck, don't freeze to death and fall into the ice canyon.
Yeah. I feel like it
Um,
was not well tested with actual students.
no, not I mean it's like I said, if you're a Sherpa, you'll learn a lot from this hike. You'll get a lot out of it. It will exercise you. It is good. But the what was my point? Oh, I forgot what my point was. Sorry. Darn it.
Ancient Greek alive.
No, doesn't matter. I got
So,
distracted by imagining climbing up Everest.
well, you've got to come back here and actually
Oh,
do a little climbing here.
see the
It's
real
been
mountains.
it's been 2 years,
I know. Wow, you're
mm,
right. Okay.
but it was a great
That,
time, and
it was.
it was about this time of year 2 years ago.
You're right, it was. Well, then it shall be.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to go before very long, sir. I've really appreciated the chance to talk to you again
You
and
too.
to share some thoughts with people out there. Hope live participants have enjoyed listening to us carry on. And because I always find it valuable to get your not just your feedback, but your take on things, right? I mean, you have a I think you're one of the foremost people working in this sort of thing right now.
Oh,
So
I wish that were true. Oh, I just remember what I was going to talk about. Right, that I made those videos of ancient Greek in action to prepare the student for Athanaze. Um, and then I stopped because I realized maybe I shouldn't be building what I want to be a really good video course off of a highly flawed textbook. That was my change in thought process. Well, I learn from you every time we talk, including this conversation, and I'm really glad we got to delve into these topics again because they ought to be revisited
yeah,
often.
well, and I mean, hey, we're constantly learning. Like, I don't imagine that I'm ever going to perfect how to teach Old Norse, or like I'm always open to learning new ways to approach old problems.
Oh yeah,
So, uh,
constant innovation and experimentation.
yeah, and it's valuable to have such different perspectives as you and I actually do on this, and to see the worth in different approaches, and consider what one might take from one and borrow from another. I mean, it's not like there's any one single answer to this either. So,
Unless it's 42.
right, okay. Well, I hope to see you at G&E. And yeah, good to see you, Luke.
You
Thank
too.
you, Patreon. Now, I wish everybody all the best.